So without further ado, I want to warmly welcome our panellists who have given up their time to be here. And just in the last 10 minutes, I've learned so much about them, and they've challenged my perceptions, in terms of who I thought they really were. So first of all, I want to kind of introduce you to David Griffiths from the Mount School. David, would you just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
I am the headmaster, or principal as it's known, at the Mount School in York. And not too dissimilar people will say, where do you come from? And I say, Hong Kong. And they look at me and they say, no. But that is actually true. And then at the age of 7.5, I was sent away to boarding school, packed off. And then every holiday I would go to where my family came from, which is a place in Leeds called Dewsbury Moor. And some of you may know Dewsbury Moor, some of you may not. Made famous for Shannon Matthews, who decided to hide. And during my holidays, I would spend my time on the housing estate, and then at the end of the holiday, I would find myself heading back to boarding school. And then as an educator, I think I'm quite lucky in that I've worked in both sectors. I've worked in the state sector and had leadership responsibility, and now work in the independent sector, again, with leadership responsibility. So I'm really looking forward to having an opportunity to discuss the theme this evening as we try to explore those opportunities for pupils, or as we know them, students.
Great, thank you. I'd like to introduce you to our next panelist, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Melissa Benn here this evening. Education journalist, author and co-author of Private Education Policy Forum.
But a board member. It's the first time I've ever been a board member, so I'm very proud of that. Who am I really? Oh God, I hate that question. But I'll describe it in educational terms. I'm a London villager. I was born in one London village and have moved not very far away from where I grew up. There's not many, most people you meet in London have come in from London, but I was born and still live there. I started out in private education, and then along came the comprehensive movement of the 60s and 70s, and my parents, who believed in that and believed everybody should go to school together, took myself and my 3 brothers out of private education, and we were sent to the local primary and to the local secondary school. And that caused a lot of consternation in our social world of the time. They were considered to be harming us in some way, and it's for you to judge whether I look harmed several decades on. And also because my father was a Labour politician, it caused an enormous amount of discussion. And then just to go on, I wanted my children to have the education I'd had, living in an area and going to the local school. And I sent my 2 daughters to the local primary and to the local secondary school, which was not what you would call a favoured London school. It was very, very much a mix. It looked like the London we live in now, not the London of the 1950s. And I'm very glad I did that. I supported the school throughout in various ways. So I guess what that all adds up to is that I am acutely aware of the private state school divide. I feel it harms our society, and I am passionate about improving state education, and that really sums me up in terms of today. There are other things that are interesting about me, but we can talk about those in the bar. Right.
And now I'm going to go to my final panellist. And this is really important because I said that leaders of the future are the young people in this room. How we shape education in the future won't be shaped by the likes of me, it'll be shaped by the likes of people in this room. And that's why I'm delighted to have Caroline Manakit, Chief of Staff from the 93% Foundation, and currently a philosophy undergraduate student at the University of York. So tell us just a little bit about who you are and why this agenda is important to you.
Thanks so much, Kiran. So first of all, it's so lovely to see everybody in this room, and thanks David and Melissa for your amazing introductions. I don't know how I'm going to top them off, but to introduce myself really briefly, my name is Caroline. Like Kiran said, I'm a final year student here at York studying philosophy. Graduate in 2 months, which is very scary. And a bit about me. So my parents actually moved to the UK 30 years ago from Thailand, and I was born in Durham, so I had a lot of conversation around, you know, where I'm from when I started university. You know, Durham is obviously not a very diverse place ethnically. I was actually one of the very few minorities growing up in school throughout my entire education, in fact. Very struggled sort of picking up the English language, so English wasn't my first language. I was very behind in my studies, but obviously with a lot of hard work and a lot of determination, and that pushed my parents, you know, you get what you put in this world, and obviously gained a place here at university. And you know, most of my friends from school don't actually go to uni. I'm actually one of the very few minority in my school back in Fram, and it was actually rated requires improvement by Ofsted in 2017. So when I first started York, I had a massive culture shock. I was actually the only one in my flat. Don't know if they're here today, but yeah, very lovely people, but all from private schools. So felt a very big culture shock. And so my first year, decided to take the initiative to start a student-led society called the 93% Club York. So very briefly, 93% stands for the fact that 93% of students across the UK are state educated, and it kind of snowballed, so we operate at over 50 universities in the UK, and then got appointed as Chief of Staff for the foundation, so it's just really exciting. So why am I here today? So very passionate about social mobility, something that's definitely sort of shaped my life for the past 5 years. So I'm always on the agenda and sort of lobbying government and think tanks and working with people like Melissa and PEPF and the university to obviously increase on our agenda. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. And then finally, I want to introduce you to my co-chair, who's going to say a little bit about who she is and why this agenda is important to her. Michelle, you might need the microphone.
Oh,
Michelle,
thank you.
please.
Hi everybody, so I'm Michelle Hughes and I work in the university's planning office. A bit about me, okay, so I was first in family to go to university, the first in my whole family. Actually all of my cousins, nobody went. My parents obviously didn't know anything about going to university, so they were always supportive about me going on to go to university but didn't know anything about it, so they were super helpful in getting me to explore options, but they didn't really have that sort of background to be able to help me make a massively informed choice. So we went and looked at Russell Group universities and all those sort of prestigious places. I guess I was quite lucky in that I was okay academically, but we've just had this conversation and I felt clever of being from my terrible school in Wales, but then you get to university and you're surrounded by really clever people, so you kind of do feel a little bit out of place. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say. So I guess from that experience, my first job was then to work in widening participation. So I went to work for a government campaign which was called Aim Higher, which was all about encouraging people just like me to consider university and to aspire to university. And then I went on to various other jobs, which was again all about encouraging people to go. And I think through those jobs I found out about all the different experiences that you could get from university, which I definitely did not take advantage of and did not make the most of. So that is why I'm sort of passionate to make sure that everybody has those options and is able to explore those as much as possible. And I'm working really closely with Kiran in my job now to make sure that this university is as inclusive as it possibly can be, so that people from all backgrounds and all walks of life can feel that they belong here and that they can do their best here. Sorry, I was a bit put on the spot, so I didn't know what to say.
Thanks, Michelle.
Very good.
So the theme, getting in, getting on, what we want to do is to have a challenging, a curious, and sometimes maybe heated debate on what it means to have different experiences between private and state school education. A number of us went to state schools, and I'm sure there'll be a number of people in the room who might have gone to private schools. So it's not about polarised positions. It isn't about is one better than the other. But what does that experience tell us? And I want to start off with a few stats, and I want to start off with your experience. And then we're going to hear the experiences from the perspective of the panel, not their personal experiences, but what does it like to lead a school with an incredible reputation, like the Mount? How do we choose the kinds of universities that we go to. And I know a number of us. So, you know, I went to a Backstreet Comprehensive. It's so bad it doesn't exist anymore. So does that make my education experience any less? My nephew and niece both have gone to private schools, and gosh, are they smart. They can debate like no other than I've seen because of the kinds of experiences that they've been exposed to. So today isn't about what's right, what's wrong. Today is about asking ourselves, what does it mean to get in and get on? What are the opportunities and what are the barriers? So let's have a look at some of the statistics. So some of the things that we want you to kind of think about. At school, private school pupils achieve modestly better academic outcomes from primary stage onwards, even after allowing their family backgrounds and private achievements. And when you apply to university, comprehensive school pupils are 6.5% more likely to be underpredicted than private school pupils. And I'm sure there'll be people in this room that will exemplar, like me. I was told I'd never get to university, so don't even think of it. So it sounds very special to be standing here as Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the university. Because if I'd listened to them, if I hadn't been curious, if I hadn't had that resilience, I wonder what road and what path I might have taken. I didn't come from a family that had been educated, or where education was particularly, you know, sort of valued. So what does that mean then, when we look at the predicted in terms of high achieving pupils whose grades are underpredicted? What's the implications of that? And you can have a look at some of those other stats. What does that mean for you when you see those stats from your experience? Do they surprise you? Do they make you curious?
No, they don't surprise me at all. I went to private school, and one of the things that always was quite incredible was those students who got into Oxbridge had a photo taken on the lawn, and then that would go into the hallway. And the year that I was there, we're obviously having a bit of a dud year, and not that many students, as were expected, got into Oxbridge that year, so no photo was taken of the very small group. It wasn't put on the hallway, but that showed that there would usually be such a high proportion that would get in. And I think, in terms of experience, one of the things that I often think is like underappreciated in the debate about experiences between private and state schools is even just like the architecture. Going from my school to going to Cambridge was just like, it honestly, I think it was the same architect. Like it was the same era and the same buildings. And so it's just home from home, and the school you're at expects that that's where you're going. What was interesting though was one of my mates who came from a tougher background and got in on a bursary, which was only 1% free places in the sector, before we think there's loads of those kids, but she was on a bursary, and she didn't want to go to uni, and the school I was at sent a letter home to the parents saying, well, she doesn't want to go to university, we've got no other options for her, are you aware of this? And didn't present anything else for her to do. So there was also a neglect within the school that I found. I don't know if that makes sense. Depended what route you were going to take, and if it wasn't the one that not all private schools are like this, but the school I was at was like that. And she felt very unsupported.
It's interesting. I'm going to come to the panellists for some comments and observation. I can just see.
Yeah, we're all
We're
knowing that we should let the audience speak.
Well, I would agree with everything you've said there, and I'd go a stage further. I'm involved in some other charities, as I believe, if you work in this sector, you should be involved with. And for people in, I don't know if you know BAE on the coast, but Barrow in Furness and a lot of the towns along that coastal line, when it comes to post-16, it's all about apprenticeships. The conversations are around them trying to get into BAE so that they have a job because of the deprivation in that area. And so even the schools are promoting that as the next step, whether they are incredibly gifted with mathematics, and perhaps in times before they may have been encouraged to go to engineering, they're actually saying, if you go do your apprenticeship, then actually you can actually pick up these courses as part of the apprenticeship. So I think the landscape has changed as we look at post-16 and the opportunities. I don't know if any of you know another company called Global Bridge, which again works also in the independent sector around trying to promote apprenticeships as an option, specifically for the interests of the individuals. And I think that has to be applauded, because, like you, there was no hesitation. It was university, military, religion had dropped off, but historically in independent schools those would be predominantly the three major careers that you might be pushed towards. Whereas now in the independent sector, what I'm really enthused about is that apprenticeships specific to the desire and interest of the individuals is now coming to the fore.
I think that's an interesting development when privileged schools encourage their students to do apprenticeships which are associated with lack of ambition. I've got three things to say very quickly arising from these statistics, and they're all words of caution. The first is, if we look at that first statistic about achieving moderately better incomes, which is true as well, we'll come on to that, outcomes. I mean, we can't talk about that without talking about the 3-to-1 resource gap, and that therefore if state schools had 3 times as much resources, those figures would change. The second thing I think we have to be cautious about is having a nuanced view of the state sector. There is all the world of difference between a school, say, somewhere like Middlesbrough, where I did a long piece, a feature, where or any area where you have very disadvantaged pupils and you have struggling schools, and a grammar school in Kent, which is more or less akin to a private school, not in its resources, but in terms of its expectations and family background. There are also very many comfortable, relatively affluent middle-class families within the state sector in comprehensives that assume their children go to university. So I think that's a really important nuance. And the third is just something from what everybody said already has come out today, and I've heard it throughout my life, and it's not to pick on your description of your terrible school, your awful comprehensive. I've monitored this language for years, and it is part of the language of politics and the press. Awful comprehensive, good grammar,
prestigious,
excellent private school. We can't look at those things without saying, well, why was it an awful school? What were the teachers struggling with? Look, today we have a headline, 2 million people in this country, or yesterday, can't eat 3 meals a day. I mean, it's all got worse during the pandemic. Poverty has always been the background to this story. We can't look at the schools and say, bad people, lack of ambition. We have to have a bigger view of it. I'll stop there, but
thank you.
I feel very strongly about it.
Just before we come, to Caroline, let me just pick up on a couple of points. Don't wait to be asked to ask a question. You're curious students. There's an incredible mix of experience in the room. So if you want to ask, just stick up your hand and I'll come to you. I want to come back to a couple of points that both David and Melissa, if you have made. If I take my experience, it was really interesting because it was an ex-grammar school, and so when I was growing up, it had turned into a comprehensive. So you had this divide between the grammar school teachers and what was then, and this is not me saying this was what language it was, the new trendy left teachers that were in my school. And I can remember, I did A-level English, I got really intrigued into Shakespeare, kid growing up in East End of London, because we were taken to see Much Ado About Nothing in the open air theatre at Regent's Park. And when I passed my English, the English teacher, who was from the old grammar school part of the school, said, I see they don't take spelling into consideration anymore, Kiran, because I had passed. And I chose to do a GSC in English rather than the O-level, because that teacher saw something in me. So you're absolutely right, it isn't about whether something is good or bad, it's in the experience of what do we relate to. Caroline, before I come to you, David, can I just come back to you? as a principal at the Mount School, and given your background, how do you work with, you know, some of those challenges that we've just been talking about in terms of access, you know, so before those children kind of get to university, because it's a high quality, high reputable school.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky. I've only been at the school since January, but how you describe it is very accurate. I mean, the facilities are fantastic. It's an all-girls school from 3 to 18. There's around 200 in the school. But one of the things which I would have picked up on as well around what we were describing in terms of how do we know and how do we get them to pursue their dreams means that you have to have a lot of conversations, which often need a lot of time that probably goes on beyond the normal school day, especially those who board within the school, around what are their dreams, and then how do you then try and support them in achieving those dreams. And we have a broad spectrum of girls in the school, some who have a love of performing arts, some who would like to go on to university, whether that be in the UK or internationally, and some students who would like to return to their country of origin to go to their university in those countries. So we have a broad spectrum of interests, a whole host of dreams that we're trying to support people to achieve. And I guess the one word that I'd use in how we facilitate that is in the giving of time. And that resource is one of teacher-driven, not of actual material items.
Thank you. Caroline, can I come to you, because your story was so powerful, and we're talking, you know, before we even get to university, you know, so tell us a little bit about your resilience, you know, your fight, your ambition. How did you kind of break some of those ceilings? Because it is so easy to get pulled down and suffocated.
Yeah, no, you're so right. There are definitely moments during my career, like before I started university, and I was just like, what is the point? You know, my English was so bad growing up, to the point where I would just like come home crying because my school and my teachers would have to put in like extra provisions in place, or like I would have to give up my lunchtime like reading Othello, and like I just didn't understand it because my parents just simply wasn't exposed to all of that, and it didn't click until, you know, I was trying to do what I can to help and support my parents. You know, my first job was in my school canteen, like cleaning tables, and it was enough to sort of fund my weekly bus pass to go to school. I had to wake up at 6 AM every day, which was very painful. But I now live really close to uni, which is quite nice. And we also get 366 bus. But you know, it wasn't until until my head teacher came up to me, and he was like, you know, Caroline, like, I've never actually met somebody that, you know, juggles so much in terms of, you know, aside from your studies. You know, you're working, you're studying, and, you know, you should really look into something that, you know, is very resilient driven, and all of that. And my teacher was like, well, why don't you look, you know, into a career in law? Like, you love, you know, positive change, and like you're very interested in politics. And I was just thinking, like, my gosh, like I could never articulate myself properly at all, because like my English was so bad. And you know, because I was studying so much after school and having to stay after school for hours and hours and hours just to make sure that my English was good, it then started to click that I was getting the grades, because actually I was failing a lot of my subjects and I was hitting that A's and A stars, and I just thought, you know, well, maybe university is a thing for me. Let me try and explore this. And you know, I'm here, you know, studying a philosophy degree here at York, and it's like what David said. You just need to have that conversation with teachers, and I think it's a real struggle, because the school that I was growing up in, the class sizes were so big, and I can just see that stretch of teachers really willing to help their students, but they were just so stretched on time. You know, there was a point where my class size was around like 35 students. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the experience would like be in a private school, but I definitely can see, you know, how much time teachers put in, and it was just a stretch. So yeah, no waffled there, but yeah.
No, I think I do know the statistics. I don't know the statistics of David's school, but I think it's generally 27% pupils in a state school class on average and 15 in a private school. But I think you do get classes that are bigger at times of stress. When I was at school, I remember my history O-level class was 42 of us. So it was more like a kind of party than a class. I have to say it was my favourite subject. And there is a very interesting side issue about a lot of people in the state sector say class size doesn't matter. I think class size matters hugely because it's about time. And your point about giving time to shape your dreams, your point about somebody giving you time, I suspect that for a lot of people getting to university, there was one person who said, like your teacher, Kiran, you can do it. And you only need one line of encouragement for it, and somebody just saying, I'm watching you and I'm willing you on. And often people have it with their parents, and sometimes that can be complicated. But but state school teachers don't have time. I feel I'm here to make these broader points. They are so pressed for time, and even more so now than ever. And I think we need a system that gives them the time that the teachers have in David's school. Because I know so many of them want to do more for their students than they can.
Sorry, it's a little bit off topic, but I would agree with that. We're training psychologists at York St John, and sort of from a behavioural and a learning and difficulty perspective, how on earth are they expected to pick up on things like that when they've just got so many kids in the class to be on with at once? So I would agree with that.
It's a really important point, and I want to pick up just before I ask David to comment, and then we're going to move on to question 2, and Michelle's going to take us through question 2. There are 3 themes that have come up, from what the panelists have said, and your really powerful insight is, one is about space, isn't it? Where do we learn to feel that we belong, and actually somebody sees something in us that we don't see in ourselves? Because if you're told for most of your life you're not going to make anything of yourself, and even to this day, I can remember when I got my PhD, my doctorate. That was the highlight. That was me having kind of made it. That was the thing that proved to myself. And I remember sitting during the viva, and it's complex, these processes. And they said you passed, and there was no emotion in you whatsoever. Congratulations, Dr. Trehan, you passed. Because all my life, I've never got anything first time round. And so I was waiting. There's the but. And my supervisor, and I've been trained, you don't get it first time round, you don't get it first time round. Lancaster's a great university, it's where the privilege go. Well, it wasn't just where the privilege went. And so and he said, I think she's waiting for you to tell her what more she needs to do. Is it major or minor? And they said, put a full stop on page 38. And even to that moment, it was almost like what you say, all your life you are told you are not quite good enough. And even now, many of us in this room, if we've written, I don't think I'm quite good enough. One day someone's going to find out, I'm not really a Pro-Vice-Chancellor, I'm not really a professor. Because that's not what we were brought up to believe in. Just in the way that your very powerful story, Caroline, kind of resonated. And Melissa, I think you make a really important point, which I want to come back to the end. It isn't enough to know those statistics. What do we do? Because actually what I think is unique about the 93% Foundation is that you're an activist, and you're challenging the kinds of systems, but creating a movement for change. Because we can't keep having that conversation. So David, what are the sizes, and what makes that learning experience distinctive and different?
I think I've got to be careful because, I'm not here to sell the mount, but our ratios are actually better than what would be considered the norm. We would have A-level classes up to 8, and in some subjects we would run them with 2 or 3 individuals, and we have done that in collaboration with Helping All Saints, which is a local school near to us, in then facilitating some of the aspirations of those children. But I absolutely, totally agree with what's being said around time and class numbers. In order to build and scaffold, if you look at Dwight and scaffolding learning, how on earth are you able to scaffold learning for individuals to a point where they are A-star pupils if in a class of 30 you have maybe 8 different levels? I think that has to be looked at, and is something which really needs to be reviewed. But then when we talk specifically around what we're here to discuss today about when students then come to university, you know, for my girls, every day there are 3 activity choices, orchestra, choir, a performing arts option, then there's debating, there's lots of clubs and societies, both within the curriculum and beyond the curriculum, that they can then access. And that means that you're then scaffolding the learning outside of the classroom. Then we talk about things like extracurricular trips and the way in which we structure, and all independent schools do it, the way in which they structure their holidays. And therefore, because they have slightly longer holidays, because we'll work Saturdays, it then means that you may then be able to take a group away to then conduct research. So at the Mount, that's something that we do in the summer. We go to North Iceland, we conduct research for universities. It then means in their upper 6th year, they're able to, on interview, interact at university, interview about something that they've not just studied, but they've actually seen live out. And if they're going on to study something around geopolitics or science, they've then had those opportunities. So it's not just time within the curriculum, it's actually time beyond that. And it's important to note that for those teachers going on those trips, like myself, I go to Iceland on expedition, I give 3 weeks of my holiday, there's no extra reward for that. And that's the same for all the trips that we operate, certainly within the Mount. So time and opportunity.
Right. So final words before I move on to the second question.
Yeah, but all I was going to say to respond to David is, what a completely different experience those 18-year-olds will have had from the 18-year-olds in the school that my children went to. I mean, I was trying not to do a cheap joke about the only Iceland they go to is on the Kilburn Highway. But, you know, I mean, actually, that is true. And when we come on to when people from different schools meet at universities like this, we're talking about this absolutely different cultures, expectations, experience. I think it's really important for us to know that, and to know it's nothing to do with the quality of the young people. It's everything to do with structures of society that historically shaped this country and we have not tackled yet. And we're talking about it, and it's really important, but why is this still the way that we do it? Why do we give the poor the least? Don't get it.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because I think it's important. Sorry, it's really important to understand as well that a lot of the institutions beyond England that have set up franchise schools and different opportunities mirror and match the independent school sort of structures here. And so for those international students that are then coming to university, when I was the head of Wickham Abbey in Changzhou, those students, when they were coming over to Cambridge, were actually going and accessing the rowing club. And if you were to look at the demographics of how many international students who come then access those clubs and societies, if they've been set up in a model which is like I could mention a lot of brands, then they're probably more likely, when it comes to Freshers Week, to be signing up for all those clubs and activities. And actually, again, it means that those that are coming from our system, again, are probably not accessing those opportunities as readily.
Great, thank you. I want to move on to the second question, because it builds on some of the things that we've just been talking about, and Michelle's going to just take us through, some of the stats in terms of, we talked about before university, but what happens during university? What happens when we actually get here, and what's that experience like? So Michelle, talk us through some of the facts and figures.
Okay, so proportionately many more privately educated people obtain university degrees than state educated pupils. I'm going to go back into my comfort zone here and speak to some of the students, because that's what I like to do. So any views from any of the students in the room about that first one?
Come on.
Go on, Phoebe.
I guess with the first one, when I think about, for example, statistics, so all my siblings went to the correctly secondary school, sixth form, for instance, and they started in the state Catholic school in my house, and then my parents shipped them to private school. and then it kept me, but I'm not offended. But essentially,
With the special one.
yeah,
So
that's
that
how I
is,
look at it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think with that, when you look at the stats in their school, you can pass it down a good like 78% or plus, or 90, or going to university or are studying, maybe doing apprenticeship with different facts. But there's the fact that they're continuing their journey in comparison to maybe some of the schools in my area. There's like such a big gap, and I think it goes down to maybe the area you live in and what university looks like. And I think with a lot of people, it's the whole idea of, okay, great, I would love to go to uni, but there's accommodation, there's so many different fees associated with it. I'll just go and do something else, or so on and so forth. And I think one of the biggest things, I think for me, and with my culture being from Nigeria, is that education is such a big thing promoted in our household. So whether you're smart or you're not so smart or whatever, you're still going to go to school, you're going to do well, you're going to pass, and whatever you want to do after is up to you. But I think because they drilled that in, you never saw school as not an option. But as David was mentioning, in the extracurricular, that my parents take us to like music lessons, all these different things outside to make sure that you're having the other aspects as well. But I think it doesn't surprise me as a statistic. But I think it's interesting because it's whether or not the same level of energy, as you mentioned earlier, that okay, it's go to school, go to university, is put in to maybe state educated students, or is it just finish, just get your GCSEs and whatever happens after is up to you.
Yeah, and it's almost that, are you encouraged to go as high as you could go? And, if you've not got that experience in your family that says, we could go off and do this, then it's really tricky to kind of navigate that. Any other views on that one?
I'm not a student now.
That's
I graduated
okay.
a long time ago. But
You were once.
Oh yeah, 12 years ago I was here at York. And I think coming from a African-Jewish comprehensive, one thing I found was that we weren't really prepared for the academic structure of the course. I didn't know what referencing was when I first got here, and I handed in my first essay without any references, which is so embarrassing, but I had no idea what they were. And everyone else seemed to just know. And another thing I noticed was how in seminars I studied history, so it was obviously quite a lot of discussion. The private school kids were so much more confident about discussing stuff, and I'd come from a school where lower down the school you would literally get bullied if you put your hand up. By sixth form obviously it wasn't that bad, but it still wasn't the done thing. People would just sit there quietly, not participating, and it was just so ingrained in me that you wouldn't really put yourself forward, even though that wasn't my natural personality, that I just would just sit there in seminars thinking, I'd quite like to say this, but someone else would probably say it better than me and more confident. And that happened so many times. And with the mention of societies and taking advantage of those opportunities, I thought it was noticeable that I don't know if York still does this, but they used to have the elections for all the societies at the end of the autumn term. So if you were a fresher, you'd only been there for a few weeks, but there were freshers standing for the president of the rugby club and stuff. I was like, there's a hierarchy to this, surely. I can't get there in 2 months and you're like, yeah, I want to be the president. But they didn't think Boris Johnson probably did something like that. Yeah, and now I'm old, I understand that, I understand where that comes from, but at the time I didn't. I was like, no one from my school would have done that. They'd joined the rugby club, yeah, but they'd kind of work their way up maybe and gradually, they'd be quiet at first, but then they gradually get a bit more confidence. But that's not how those people work. They were just straight in.
There's a lot to be said for working your way up.
Yeah,
I think, rather than thinking you can be the Prime Minister.
Well, that's
just
what I was
because
taught. It was more like, you wait, someone notices your hard work and stuff. You don't necessarily put yourself forward for stuff that you're not entitled to at a young age or whatever.
And it's that feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of these super confident people that makes you just sort of retreat a little bit more, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm similar to Grace in that graduated a long time ago, a bit of an imposter. I guess my kind of view on it is a bit different in that I did go to private school until I was 16, and then my bursary ran out, my parents couldn't afford to send me anymore, and I went to York College down the road, which had a phenomenal experience there compared to my time at private school. It felt like my teacher at private school wasn't into performing arts, wasn't into sports, wasn't into music. All I was nosy, liked to chat to people and liked writing. And it was at college that someone thought, oh, she could be a journalist. And that's where I've ended up. But I think what I'd sort of say is almost a kind of contrast to what Grace has just said. For me, I actually felt like the state post-16 setup actually really set me up well for uni in that I was very much more left to my own devices. I was expected, you've chosen to be here of your own accord. No one's made you stay here. No one's making you turn up to lessons every day. No one's going to make you stand behind you and make you do your coursework. If you don't do it off your own back, you're not going to do it. I found that out the hard way because I actually didn't get into uni the first time round because I spent half of my time doing my A-levels on Coney Street in York in the Willow. But what I mean to say is when I got to uni, I'd had that experience of independence that I don't think I would have got so much had I have stayed at my private sixth form, where it was basically very much like, what are your goals, what are your aspirations, we will put blood, sweat and tears into this to get you there. And I actually found quite a few of my friends who went to uni from private schools actually quite struggled when they got there and realised that their seminar leaders and their tutors weren't going to bust a gut to make sure they got a first or a 2-1. You're very much expected to be independent and take control of your own studies. So in some ways I felt like I benefited from those 2 years of having less of a handhold.
Well, the evidence does back you up there on that final sentence about what is the exact stat on that? Is it firsts?
Yeah, this is the final one. Yeah, I think state educated students. Yeah, same A-level grade, state educated students come out with more firsts, I think. Yeah, but it's exactly your point. I mean, it's interesting, your thing of help people nurture their dreams could be seen as spoon feeding and for everything we're talking about, there's another way of looking at it. So nurturing your dreams could be shaping them a little too much and holding back their independence. I mean, that's sort of, you're saying you learnt that. You may not agree with me, it's just a way, it's just a thought.
Daisy, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, you see, I quite agree with Phoebe in terms of state schools, a lot of it is to do with the postcode lottery. I'm very lucky because I went to a state school, but mine was a grammar school. And I think that with the grammar school, there was a massive emphasis of like, I'm lucky to go to one, but I think that the way in which they nurtured us as students was not good whatsoever for us as people and our mental health. Because they were saying that if you don't go to university, you fail at life, and they kind of took the top students of the class and focused on them, and then all the other ones. Some teachers would pick like the top 5 students, and then everyone else would kind of have to fend for themselves. And I remember when I was doing my English GCSE, I was predicted a 4, and at parents' evening, the teacher had the audacity to tell my Chinese mother, if she works hard, then she's going to get 5, but she's lucky if she gets a 6. I came out with a 9 and a 7 in my English GCSE, and that was because my mum tutored me, not because of the teacher. And when I came to university, some people in my flat didn't even know what a grammar school was, and my cousin, she's from Nottingham, they live in Mansfield. They went from the local village primary school to the local secondary to like the next 6th form. And I really do believe that it is a postcode lottery because I got a much better quality of education despite the terrible means they went through compared to my cousin because I come from Kent in Dartford. So I had access to grammar school.
Dartford Grammar?
Yeah.
But it's not postcode, it's selection, sorry. It's not a postcode. It's you take the 11 plus and you get in. So
Well,
it's
the postcode that you're in a selective
so
authority,
you're
I
in
guess.
yeah. I mean,
But and then
yeah,
selected.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel I've said too much, but I've got a lot to say on
No,
that.
you haven't.
So I guess there's that fine balance between expectation, but also pushing you to go as far as you can.
Yeah, and also when you do say about the selection, I completely agree because you get these like, I started training because my mum started preparing me for the 11 plus. I never had a tutor. We'd spend our summers in WH Smith, so it wasn't summer holiday, it was summer school. And she would buy the bond books to train my older brother and I so that we could have those opportunities. And I was born in Norwich where there were no grammar schools. So when we moved to Dartford, my mum had to do a lot of research to find out what kind of schools there are there to give my brother and I the best opportunity. And I remember she told my brother and I, don't worry about the year 6 or like the year 5 stats. They're not important. That's not what's going to get you into a better school. The kind of mathematics and the English skills that you need for the 11 plus, for you to pass, they're only taught in year 6, or at least from when I was back in primary, after the 11 plus, which in my opinion is not very fair because it means that it forces parents to be able to teach their children to get into the 11 plus, and if the parents can't teach a child, then they'll have to outsource for a tutor, and some people just can't afford that, and a lot of kids aren't as lucky as me, who have a mum who loves and cares and like is willing to put that work in to tutor me and my brother to get to a grammar school.
And resilience or not, even if you get to the point where you need to interview for university, you're up against people that have been to Iceland and have done research. So.
Do you know what I was going to say? Can I just say it's all part of the nuance of this. A grammar school would be academically pushing you, but what you're saying your grammar school didn't have were the resources to give the round education that a paying education can do, because your job is to nurture the dreams and the whole, whereas a grammar school is saying we're gonna it's very driven, it's a driven experience, and that's different. I just have to say about grammar schools, if we talk about discouraging children from disadvantaged backgrounds, there is no better system than telling a child at 10, which is when you take it, you're a success, which I think is a bit discouraging in terms of you've got to, why be a success? But saying to most of them, you're a failure. It is a crazy way to educate anyone. So,
but also private schools are selective, so I don't.
Not all are.
50% are, and most of the ones that we think of are, most of the ones that are in with the Independent Schools Council are. So that, again, I had friends from my primary school who applied for the school that I went to and didn't get in. So even though, and that was in Norwich, so even though it wasn't selective, they were also told at 10, oh, well, you didn't pass that. And I don't think private schools always get put under the same scrutiny as grammar schools, that they're doing the same system, and a load of kids get told you didn't pass. And their parents are especially, they wanted to pay and they're pissed off.
So that's at the young age of the spectrum. And then I'm just going to challenge perhaps, and today we were talking and you are about to graduate and you're going off on your next step in a completely new field. And so this is where we talk about the dreams and the aspirations. So my sister went off to conservatoire, now works in HR, HR director. I went off to play professional sports and then did my degree into education. And so in independent schools, and certainly at the Mount, all of my girls are involved in music. They are all involved in Lambda. So actually at 18, what we're saying to them is what's your dream? And if their dream is to then go study music or conservatoire or music at university, then they can go and do that, because that's following their dream. And at the end of that dream and that course, a bit like yourself, they then might think to themselves, right, I'm now going to move over into this career because I'm a little bit older, a little bit more wiser, and now I've decided that actually I've explored my music, which I had a passion and love for, but I'm now going to go and study something else. And I think that is another conversation which then goes to the connectivity of the questions that have been posed here today. What actually supports you then on your journey to then getting into a career that you really want to then pursue? And it's whether or not then it's the independent school network or the state school network or the people that you've come across at university who can then facilitate your next step. But I think that's both ends of the spectrum. So at your age, having to do all of those things, through to then at 18, and maybe in the independent sector, we have a slightly different perspective. What's the dream? We can support you on your dream. You're an alumni member of the school. When you graduate, we're still going to then try and support you into what might be your next step. And that's, I think, very different to the conversations perhaps that I experienced when I was working in the state sector.
Yeah, because it's about resources. I mean, it really is about resources. It's
knowledge resource, yes.
No, it's about that you have the resources to do all those things. I'm sure you're all great people. It's not about who we are as people. I think we have to look behind it and say, you have, through the parents paying the money to produce everything you've talked about, from extracurricular to Iceland to the alumni network, which we will come on to. And I just, state schools don't have that. Even grammar schools don't have that.
Got lots of hands. You've had your hand up for...
just jumping on the resources, I also think it's about the willingness for the teachers to actually want to do more. Because I know in my school, all of the kids that when I was there, I went to state, but a lot of my peers were all wealthy, as it were, for a state school. But the one in Wales, the one down the road wasn't so much, and their teachers didn't give the children as many opportunities as mine did. 15 of my sixth form peers, like Oxford, we were all given one-on-one hourly sessions for our CVs and to do interviews for university. But a lot of the kids in the road down the school down the road didn't get this opportunity. So I do think it is about the willingness of the teachers. I don't think it's as much willingness in state schools because I don't think they're paid as much as private. So I think they do have a lot more opportunities and resources, as you said, to give that time to the students. But I do think it is more about the teachers wanting to give to the students.
So let's take 2 more questions, and then I want to come back to the panel. So there's a question here first, and then there's a question there.
It wasn't a question, it was a question, but more just an observation. I am a Mount girl alumni, and as and I'm me and my friends, so I'm now 27, and we still talk about the Mount girl experience, and I'm processing my education and the privilege that came along with that I didn't understand through my uni experience, and now we're doing our doctorate in psychology, and that was a lot of reflection and understanding about social justice and privilege. And we talk about the Mount girl essence that comes from attending the school where we are. So my first experience of a university lecture, seminar, I was speaking and a boy cut me off. That was my big thing of, oh, gender, that's I haven't experienced that before, but that the ease at which I think my friend group find we move from different situations, which comes from our schooling, which comes from having the small classes, feeling confident in any kind of room.
But that's such a really powerful point that you just made, the richness of that experience, and then, even with that, as you said, when a seminar, and then a boy cuts you off, I can remember being in a seminar, really liberal white females when I was doing my masters, and they asked me for a black woman's perspective, and I wasn't being clever, and I said, I don't know what a black woman's perspective is, because I didn't see myself as a black woman. So it's really, and it was naivety, or when people would say, have you been discriminated against? And I was thinking, no. But then you're exposed to something like university, or you sit on a bus and someone will sit next to me, but not next to the Indian woman that's got Indian clothes on. And suddenly those things shine, a light, or kids like me get into those universities and then their parents turn up in their Indian clothes and you are different. So I think, these are things I want to come back to the panellists about. When we talk about university and we talk about our experiences during, and Caroline, I'm going to come to you about, setting the 93%. About what was it about your experience that made you kind of want to be active? But I want to come back to here. And if there are any final questions on this theme, I don't want to stifle the debate. We'll pick those up.
I just want to pick up on the resources. I think it's a bit more complicated than the amount of money a school might have, but it's also things like in the state sector you have to do or you're strongly encouraged to do the e-backs or the arts that kind of just being sidelined with very few resources in terms of time for the arts, but also the expectation actually for students to go on and do degrees that might make some money. So there isn't encouragement to go on and be an actor actually. That's my daughter wants to do that. She's being strongly discouraged. That's not seen as a proper thing to do. It's not a safe career choice, etc., etc. So that's requiring us to go, actually that's okay, Polly, do that. But that requires us as a family to kind of have some financial security to be able to say that as well. Where I've got students who come to York St John who are saying, well, I felt I had to do something like going to teaching because that's a responsible thing to do. I realised in hearing I don't actually like children. I wanted to do English lit, but I was told at school, don't do English lit, it doesn't make you money, it doesn't do, right, go to English lit, please go to English lit, you don't like children. But it's this thing of this is the legislation, isn't it, of trying to, in some state areas, I think we're trying to push things that are seen as the right thing to do, which aren't necessary. So it's different. I suppose what I'm saying is, actually, you can have those dreams if you're a particular type of person, it seems.
Yeah.
And those dreams have to be supported.
Yeah.
We can dream. I always say, every one of us has a dream, don't we? And we learn that resilience when those things don't go our way. And we've heard, a number of those stories that there is something in each of us, or through our parents, or those critical friends, or those kind of allies. Caroline, I want to come to you on the final point on this one before we move on. What was it, in terms of your experience at university, that then triggered you to do something like the 93%, foundation? Because I'd imagine you've had enough to do just being here and with the coursework and your experiences. Given the diversity of thought that we've had. And I was struck when you spoke about your experience about referencing. You know, Sunday night, I was helping my niece do her referencing because she got 54% and she just didn't understand a comment, you know, from a Russell Group university, which is, your referencing is all wrong. And she just looked at me and said, well, what's wrong with it? There was no academic text in it, it was Google. That's how she'd learned at school, and that's what got her A's. So from your experience, Caroline, you know, given the context and the debates that we've just been having, when we are actually, you know, at university, what's it been like for you?
I think, you know, I'm in my final year now, but in my first year I definitely did struggle a lot in terms of like fitting in. I definitely had an incredible amount of imposter syndrome, and sort of linking it back to the earlier discussions about resources. You know, the school that I went to, for example, I did GCSE geography. Our textbook was actually 2003, the textbook for geography in terms of from 2003, sorry, and I actually sat my GCSE exams 2017, so we were very, very, very under-resourced in terms of, you know, books and resources. And as a school, we, you know, my head teacher was so open about it, like we did struggle to get things like updated textbooks, and there'll be times when my history teacher would have to like download revision guides from like student room. I don't know, I mean, that was my experience as well. Or like we'd have to look at like YouTube videos for 20 minutes because that would form the basis of our revision, because we just didn't have the updated resources in hand to teach us all. And then on top of that, so I didn't have the experience of like doing horse riding or like going to Iceland, for example, or like having an alumni work or doing polo. I never had that experience. So when I come to university, I was just like, gosh, like I'm so basic. Like I don't have like any of these like soft skills or any of these exposure to like all of this like upper class sort of like experience and lifestyle. So I was so unaware of like the entire like structure and, you know, structures of society, like what you said earlier, Melissa. And so I just really struggled, and on top of that I just found a sort of a sense of like lack of belonging. And obviously it's very, very sad, but like I'm not trying to bug it down, because obviously I've got a very positive ending out of it, but I did just felt like I didn't fit in, and you know, I was just sort of like trying to find friends or people on my course that had very similar backgrounds to me, and I just found it so hard to keep a conversation going based on what our values were and what we had in common and what we didn't. And so I just sort of took the initiative and found out about the 90% Club through, you know, events that I did with Social Mobility Foundation. So they're a very similar organisation helping students who come from socially mobile backgrounds to get into university. And so I just thought, I've got to give this a crack and try and find people like myself, and yeah, and then started the society, and it's just sort of skyrocketed. But it's kind of, yeah, that's sort of my experience.
Okay, Melissa. And
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel not sad for you because you're fantastic, but the idea that playing polo or being able to horse ride to Iceland is a sign of anything. Because I'm now adding horse riding to Iceland, because Iceland's become the emblematic thing. Whereas the point that you made, which I know many state school students feel, about going into seminars and feeling that there are people there who are more confident, and I think that is a difficult one, because there's two sides to everything: confidence and maybe a sense of entitlement, and then the gender thing, that's also, are men more confident or are they just worse listeners, you know? So we've got to, I'm not answering that, I'm just asking it. And so we've got to think about all these things, and it upsets me for so many students that they're so clever, they've done so well, your work ethic is unbelievable from before you even got to university. And then you get somewhere and you think, I can't speak. I mean, I guess learning to speak is a skill, which is clearly a privately educated skill. I mean, I went to an Eton, Eton took students from our school for a week, and I went to see the final result. It was absolutely fascinating. You can see where Boris Johnson comes from, I'm here to tell you, because it is all about project, speak. I know it's a very unusual private school and it's very different, but is it necessarily a good thing? So one student who went to a highly selective school went to a highly selective university and said the private school students speak even when they don't have anything to say. I have to have something to say before I speak. I'm just putting that out there, and it's not a criticism because I'm sure lots of private school students have got things to say, but it's a different mode of being that I think we should again stand back from and question rather than just accept that's great. I'm done now.
Thank you. I think those are really powerful points. They're powerful points for a number of reasons. Let me just say three. You know, one is, if we're not careful, we simply perpetuate the very systems that we're talking about today. And we raise them and we discuss them, but we don't change them. And for me, they're not polarised, just in the way that I don't think one is good or bad, better or worse. I think for me, it's about understanding, just in the way that you've been articulating, and what the whole panel have, but Melissa, in terms of what you've just kind of highlighted there is, how do we gain that kind of understanding so that we know what the rules of the game are, and then we make choices about what game we can or can't play. But it often feels like we're coming in at a very, not a particularly levelling up feel. So when we talk about levelling up, I find that whole concept, you know, complex and difficult, because actually what we do is level down. So our intention, I have to use this notion on equality and diversity work, our intentions are good, but the outcomes don't give us the things that we want. And Phoebe, and you might want to say something here at this point, because I came to an event that the student panel organised about voice and finding voice, and it stayed with me because on that particular panel, what they said was, we learned to use our white voice. And I was thinking, what's a white voice then? You know, but it was. Sorry, it just so it might be just worth saying something about that, because that's about us learning the ropes.
I think the white was something called as more educated, sounds proper, so on and so forth. And I think when you think from like a cultural perspective, people who are like maybe like so parents being migrants or immigrants or whatever, it's something where you speak your native language and then they pick up the phone and say, hello, good morning, how are you? Just like, wait, is that how you want? I think it's something where it's like you feel like you have to put it on because it puts the best forward of you first, or even like you have conversations on the phone and you meet in real life and you go, oh wow, didn't expect to see you here, and things like that. But I think what's interesting in what everyone kind of said, or even what Kiran was saying, and I wanted to ask a question about that before I say something else, was, do you think your experience was like that because of the university you went to? So I grew up in London, I actually went to the school across the way from Maisie, that's Ghana. But even what she was saying was about the whole idea of like resources and things like that, and I would argue or flip it to the other side and say, in my Catholic school in Forest Gate, they made sure girls speak, be confident, have something to say, think about it. The culture of the school was speak up, be proud of where you come from. And so when it came to things like referencing, for example, in like year 7, they made sure we did like scholars program and things like that. So obviously, schools will be fortunate to have the opportunity, but it was with things like the alumni network. So it was school making sure that, okay, based on the area, it might not be that great, but how can we use people who have gone through and so on and so forth to create that kind of opportunity for people? Because even what Dave was saying about your dreams and things like that. For example, I wanted to do piano lessons in my school. They were like, there's only like 10 spaces and there's 20 of you. I don't know how we're going to choose. And my teacher was like, but you play drums, why don't you do drum lessons instead? So I did that, but then parents helped me get piano lessons, things like that. But it was something where if I was someone else, the dream is capped at that, and then you can't continue and go forward. And so when it comes to things like applying to university, and even when you think about, like my brother's like, dude, he's done like grade 8 in piano, whatever, he's getting a diploma, and he was like, oh, I can put this on my UCAS, and I was like, must be nice, because it's then other students don't have that opportunity. So I think it's interesting when you think about things like the white boys or even confidence in speaking up, because it's like, because of where I'm from, do I have enough to say? But then arguably one could say that people from those backgrounds have way more to say, way more to give.
No! Sorry.
No, I'm saying like, being from wherever state school you went to, or whatever school you've come from, but it's like everyone has their story, their experience, and I think one thing that I haven't mentioned about university is that you learn different things, and you go, oh wow, okay, that's interesting. But it's funny because you went to a private school, I went to a state school, we sit the same exam, one of us is better than the other, and it's almost as if the build up and the work and the prep almost gets you to the university, but it's then you that has to figure out how you handle it. And I think that's what surprises a lot of my private school friends, because it's like, oh, it's really me and this degree, and it's like, yep. So how do you then navigate through that, and so on and so forth. And I think certain times, depending on the background, so I can speak from state school in the area I come from, East London, so it's very much like you want to quote unquote move out and work hard and do all these different things, and so it basically has a direct correlation to how I work in university. It's like I really want to do well at this, whereas you can argue that one who went to a different state school and Nottingham, maybe he may be wealthy or something, might have a different narrative. So it varies. It's like the whole individual student experience, but then the collectiveness.
Can I make a really quick observation? Is that okay? It's just sort of off the back of what you've just said, Kiran, but it might be that there's nobody in here from the crappy schools, but if you notice, the voices that we've heard the most are the really articulate voices from the private schools and from the grammar schools. Not that Phoebe, I could listen to you all day long.
Yeah. I thought you spoke wonderfully.
Or is it people that have got those years' experience? Yeah. So are there any students in the room from the crappy schools that perhaps, you know, just give you that space to
And
kind
that
of
crappy school was where we had our best experience.
I don't like.
I was just going to say, I did invite come back to the white voice comment though. I still feel a little bit like that on my doctorate course now, and I've worked really, really hard to get to where I am. But I do sit around lots of people that have all had private school education, but it doesn't matter to me. Sometimes I think, should I be talking in my broad Yorkshire accent?
Yes, you should.
But yeah, I should, and I worked really hard to get there, and I just think everyone can do that.
Yeah.
Not everyone. I know we all have different privileges, and it can be easier for some, for others financially, resource wise, but that doesn't take away from them how hard they work. These guys work just as hard as me to get to where we are now, but I just think it's about, yeah, you can do it in yourself.